I'll be giving a very short biography of Manto. Manto was born as Saadat Hassan Manto in 1912 in the Ludhiana district, which is now in Pakistan. His family is essentially Kashmiri, but they moved to Ludhiana before Manto was born. But Manto moved back to India sometime in 1933. He went to Bombay and he lived there for most of his life. In 1933, when he moved to Bombay, he met Abdul Bari Alig, who's a scholar and a writer, who encouraged him to write and read more than he did in Urdu. This was a huge inspiration for Manto, and he started out his literary career with a lot of translations. His very first translation was of Victor Hugo's The Last Day of a Condemned Man, and it was in Urdu, and was published in Urdu daily. Manto later became part of the editorial team at Masawat, which was a daily published in Urdu. He was on the team for a while, for about a year or so, and then in 1934, he was commissioned to write radio plays and scripts for the Urdu station in All India Radio. He was at All India Radio for about 1934. There he wrote, and later on he published a lot of his plays. There are 4 collections of this. But essentially he began by translating the works of Oscar Wilde and Victor Hugo into Urdu, and these found a wide audience. Later, after he quit All India Radio in 1943, his short stories gained more of an audience. So between 1941 and 45 was when he wrote and published most of his short stories. His later works, especially towards 1945 and 46, as the turmoil in the country grew, focused more on the darkness in the human psyche and an innate sense of human impotency. So he wrote very everyday stories about men and women. He also drew from the post-partition society around him. So when he moved back to Lahore with his wife and her family after the partition, he was a very troubled man. He's been compared to D.H. Lawrence by a lot of critics because they felt that Manto wrote about the taboos of Indian Pakistani societies. Manto's most famous story is Toba Tek Singh and Thanda Gosht, which is very well known today. And both of these reflect Manto's own state of mind during that point of time. Towards the end of his life, he became an alcoholic and had liver cirrhosis, which is what he eventually died of in January 1855.
The other story that we read on the partition was Crossing the Ravi, right, by Gulzar. And that story captures the moment of migration, right? It captures the chaos, the fear, the threat, and inadvertent violence. So we see the transition by a population from one nation to another, right? This story, one of the most iconic representations by Manto. If you ask anybody, what have you read on partition, they would suggest this particular story. I wanted to revisit this story to talk about perhaps 2 not really very observed aspects of the story. The most obvious one is the madness, right? So in Crossing the Ravi, we see the migration, the transition. Here we see a landscape, a place after partition, right? We are given a glimpse into India and Pakistan after the partition. 2 years, a couple of years, 2 to 3 years after the partition is what the narrator says when the story begins, right? So madness is quite apparent. So that is Manto's reaction to this cataclysmic event that divides a nation, right? Can we see the first slide? Okay, I have 2 commentaries to share with you today. The first one is by Stephen Alter, and the first excerpt talks about the trauma, right? Many of his short stories, Manto's short stories, focus on the sense of despair and dislocation caused by the partition of Pakistan and India in 1947. So we see that dislocation both in Crossing the Ravi and in Toba Tek Singh, where the inmates do not know where exactly they are located, right? I mean, since it's a lunatic asylum, we buy that theory, but by 2 or 3 years after the partition, we definitely know where each of the villages in both the countries are located. There's no more confusion. But since this is a story which is set in an asylum, we buy the premise that the lunatics don't know. And even the saner ones among the lunatics don't know about the status quo of the identities of particular villages. Manto vividly recreates the anger and horrors of this period and the trauma of refugees uprooted and victimized by the delineation of arbitrary borders. I like the word uprooted because the imagery of uprooting, upheaval, is there very clearly in Toba Tek Singh. If you pay attention to Khushwant Singh's translation, certain words really capture quite vividly and viscerally the idea of being physically, plucked out of a particular landscape and being thrown out of it. So that imagery is quite telling in Khushwant Singh's writing. Can we? So madness is quite the reasonable response to such a trauma, and author says that as the characters in Manto's stories confront the ruthless inhumanity of violence, their only conceivable response is madness. He sees that not only as an individual's response, but as a kind of an act of collective madness, a kind of a schizophrenia, right? That's the impact on the human psyche as a whole. So the violence itself is seen as an act of madness where people kind of forget that they are reasonable, civilized, sophisticated human beings and participate in so much, reckless and violent behavior. Okay, I'm glad you brought up Lahore. I think we did discuss the city in the previous, in the context of the previous story. So people were a bit confused as to which country Lahore would go, right? That reference is there even in this story, isn't it? Page 59, how could one guarantee that a similar fate would not befall Lahore? Right? From being Pakistani today, who could say it would not become Indian tomorrow? So that uncertainty is beautifully captured in that reference. And according to Cyril Radcliffe, his rationale for giving Lahore to Pakistan is that India had Calcutta. Right? India had Delhi. So India had a lot of big cities, and therefore he wanted to give a cosmopolitan space city to Pakistanis as well. So that is his logic in kind of dividing up dividing up the country. Can we move to the next one? So this is Manto on partition. This is what he thought about the divide. These were the times when philosophy, argumentation, or logic had lost their meaning. They were nothing but an exercise in futility. So I don't think this needs any explanation. So this is a time where there is complete run of unreason, which is probably why he chose the lunatics as the main characters to explore the theme of partition. If you look at the story, the summary that Mridula did, the story begins with a list of lunatics. Right? We have several characters who are kind of described in their own eccentricity, along with a bunch of murderers as well. So murderers and mad people are clumped together in this asylum, right? So only after that list of lunatics, at the end of that list, we get Bishan Singh, the hero of this story. In some sense, we don't have a plot per se in Toba Tek Singh. It's very episodic, right? The governments make a decision, the lunatics are described, and one particular lunatic doesn't want to go where he's supposed to go. And he kind of lies between the two borders. That's the way you can sum it up, right? So there isn't a kind of an organic plot per se, which can be neatly summed up. So if you have to do a summary, you just have to narrate each and every incident that happens in the story. Can we move to the next one? Manto takes an unusually pragmatic view of madness in the story, says Stephen Alter. For him, it is a fact of life, a symptom not only of the individual character's paranoia, but a kind of mass schizophrenia brought on by partition. So there is a kind of a paranoia which results in this kind of brutal, barbarous behavior involving a lot of violence. So paranoia and violence go hand in hand in the days of the partition. There was always the fear that the other community will outnumber your own community. So we have to keep the numbers of our community higher. So how do we do that? Go reduce the numbers of the members of the other community. So that way you'll keep your numbers high, and probably that place will come to you and not go to the other. So this is the way simple people worked out their problems during the partition. It sounds really painful and barbarous, but that's how they reacted to the madness of the partition. Right. Can we move to the next one? So this is Khalid Hassan on Manto in Pakistan. His early days, when he has moved to Pakistan, his early days were bewildering. Everything was out of joint. There was a mad stampede for allotments of evacuee property and a sense of terrible insecurity. Stampede, insecurity, bewildering. Those words capture the chaos of that particular moment. Things were so unsettled, right, to the migrants who have reached a new country. Some people were living as if there was going to be no tomorrow, right? The country had gone through such a terrifying baptism of blood and fire that the dividing line between reality and nightmare was no longer discernible. So what is reality, what is a nightmare, cannot be distinguished, cannot be separated, and that kind of confusion is communicated through the landscape of Toba Tek Singh, the story. Right? You can see the pathos in that figure's desire to know where exactly his village is going to be, whether on the side of the Indian side or whether it's going to be on the side of Pakistan, and God himself doesn't know. God, quote unquote, is a lunatic here, right? And he says, I haven't made up my mind. And the God can be a representation of Cyril Radcliffe, who takes his own good time to decide the borders, where the borders are going to be between India and Pakistan. Right? A terrifying baptism of blood fantastically captures the moment of birth of a new country. Right? Next one. Okay. Francis W. Pritchard's views on Toba Tek Singh. He also did a wonderful translation from Urdu. It's available online. So you can see the original story in Urdu and then Pritchard's commentary as well as his translation too. And he says this is surely the most famous story about partition and very possibly the best one. I'd argue that it is in fact the best and that most of the other good candidates are also by Manto. This story was one of his last ones. It was published in I don't know how to pronounce it, Funne, is that right? Lahore in 1955, the year of his death. Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan is also a fantastic representation of those times. Bishan Sahini's Thomas is also a very good representation of partition. Cold meat. There are also other ones. I Swear by God, by Manto is also a good story. Yeah. Black Marginalia, the entire collection by Manto is a highly recommended read, Black Marginalia. Okay, I wanted to pick up on two things in the story. One is the reference to his daughter. We don't really pay attention to the familial concerns of the lunatics. If you read the story very carefully, you will see that the Hindu lawyer has been jilted in love, right? His romance is broken up, right? And again, romances are broken up, courtships are broken up, the father is mad, the status of the daughter is a big question. So all these indicators suggest that the institution of the family is under huge trauma because of the partition, right? So I want to go back to, shall we do the courtship part? There was a young Hindu lawyer from Lahore. He was said to have become unhinged when his lady love jilted him. When he heard that Amritsar had gone to India, he was very depressed. His sweetheart lived in Amritsar. Although the girl had spurned his affections, he did not forget her even in his lunacy. He spent his time cursing all leaders, Hindu as well as Muslim, because they had split India into two and made his beloved an Indian and him a Pakistani. When the talk of exchanging lunatics was in the air, other inmates consoled the Hindu lawyer with the hope that he would soon be sent to India, the country where his sweetheart lived, but the lawyer refused to be reassured. He did not want to leave Lahore because he was convinced that he would not be able to set up a legal practice in Amritsar. So on the one side, we have the romance being broken up, but despite the breakup, he's still very attached to the lady, and he doesn't want to be in a divided country, right? So when his friends console him that you're going to go to India and your lady love is going to be in the same country, he's not satisfied because he's worried that he will not be able to pick up his profession in a new country. So that tells you about the real concerns, you know, the everyday concerns of livelihood, right? So above and beyond national identities, issues of livelihood become important. Right? So in that case, it's the profession that is of the foremost concern to this Hindu lawyer. And now let's look at the role of the daughter. Right? In Toba Tek Singh, Stephen Alter says, it is suggested in the hesitant remarks of one of the visitors to the asylum that Bishan Singh's daughter has been raped. But that is part of the horror which is taking place outside the main character's consciousness and does not enter into the dilemma of his own identity. Two things. Firstly, violence is off the page, right? Violence is off the page. We don't see it on the page in this particular Manto story. In fact, it is said in such a subtle way, we really have to work out, we have to kind of assume that some kind of violence has been done to the daughter. So let's look at that section. So we have Fasaldin, a friend of the family, visiting Bishan Singh, and Fasaldin says that, I have been intending to see you for the last many days, but could never find the time. All your family have safely crossed over to India. We are reminded of crossing the Ravi, you know. All your family have safely crossed over to India. I did the best I could for them. I did the best I could for them. Your daughter Rup Kaur, and that's it. His sentence is abrupt, right? He doesn't complete. And then finally, he says, somewhat haltingly, yes, she too is well. She went along with the rest. So we have to assume that something is really seriously amiss with the daughter. And look at the next paragraph. So if you look at the next paragraph, perhaps we are led to wonder if the act of violence is subsumed in symbolic narrative, in figurative narrative. He says that Fasadil started again. They asked me to keep in touch with you. I'm told that you are to leave for India. Convey my salams to brother Balbir Singh and to brother Wadhwa Singh and also to sister Amrit Kaur. Tell brother Balbir Singh that Fasadil is well and happy. Both the grey buffaloes that they left behind have calved. One is a male, the other a female. The female died 6 days later, right? And if there's anything I can do for them, I'm always willing. I have brought you a little sweet corn. So the sweet corn is a poignant touch, the human touch in this story, in this chaotic story with lots of lunatics running around spouting really existential concerns and ideas and philosophies. But that offer of sweet corn kind of humanizes this place and tells us that there is still scope for humanity and humanitarian ideals to survive. So I'm really interested in that reference to two grey buffaloes and the fact that the female buffalo is dead, right? So I'm trying to connect that with the daughter of Bishan Singh, Rup Kaur, and suggest that perhaps she too is dead after an act of violence committed on her. So we are led to work things out. So my point is that violence is off stage, as it is off stage for most of the story in Gulzar's Crossing the Ravi. The other is the dilemma of his own identity. That point is interesting because Bishan Singh seems to be most concerned with only this fact as to where exactly is Toba Tek Singh, right? He does look forward to the visits of his family. He calls that moment Miss Interview and so on and so forth. But the most important concern is where exactly is his village, right? So these two concerns are important in my reading of this particular story. Yeah, can we go more to the next one? So Bishan Singh is also known as Toba Tek Singh, and this confusion between the name of the village and the name of the main character is important to the story. By mixing up the name of the character and place, the individual and the land, Manto emphasizes the relationship between a person's home and his identity. He also uses the main character's madness to exaggerate the sense of separation, distorted loyalties, and dislocated self. All that is fine, I agree, but I have a small correction or maybe a small specification to this criticism, which is that the relationship between a person's home and his identity, in my reading, would be that Bishan Singh identifies himself not to the nationhood, not to Pakistan, right? He identifies himself in relation to his village. Right? That particular pocket in Pakistan is what concerns him. So it becomes regional identity if you want to connect it to this particular course. So he is most concerned about the regional identity rather than larger landscapes which offer him his identity. So Toba Tek Singh is worried about his village, Toba Tek Singh, because that's where his lands lie. That's what's home for him. Right? More than anything else, So it is our very, very small ties, very specific ties that somehow define us. That seems to be the message. That seems to be one of the arguments of this particular story. Can you move to the next one? So Pritchett says that my translation is literal, entirely literal. And that is the last line. In between, on that piece of ground that had no name, lay Toba Tek Singh. We know, of course, that the person Bishan Singh lay there, but since the narrator never calls this person by that name, he is able to force us to the additional reading that the real location of the village Toba Tek Singh is between the two new states' sharply demarcated borders. Right? But if the village is there, then in what sense exactly and in whose eyes is Bishan Singh sane or mad, conscious or delirious, alive or dead? With wonderful subtlety and literary restraint, the author allows us and thus also forces us to invent our own ending. So what Pritchett says is that We don't even know whether he is alive or dead. We assume that he's dead. The text doesn't spell it out that he is really gone, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty, leaving us to make up our own minds about the status of this particular hero, right? And the symbolic idea seems to be that the village itself seems to lie between these two countries, India and Pakistan, and that division causes the death or destruction of Bishan Singh. If you look at Khushwant Singh's translation, there's something different going on there. Can you move on to the next one? So this is Pritchard's translation. There behind the barbed wire was Hindustan. Here behind the same kind of wire was Pakistan. In between, on that piece of ground that had no name, lay Toba Tek Singh. The question is it the man or the village? Are we talking about literal presence or symbolic presence here? And if you look at Khushwant Singh's translation, I don't know whether I've put it there on the slide. Can you check if that's there? Oh, yes. So the barbed wire fence on one side marked the territory of India, another fence marked the territory of Pakistan. In the no man's land between the two barbed wire fences lay the body of Bishan Singh of village Toba Tek Singh. Right? So he kind of takes away the subtlety. Khushwant Singh takes away the subtlety by spelling it out clearly for us that this is the body of Bishan Singh, who is from that village. So that confusion between the person and the village is taken away by Khushwant Singh. Right? So Pritchard's translation seems to be better here because of the layers, the symbolic layers of meaning. Right? So the key point that I kind of reiterate time and again is the fact that the loyalty is towards the village, smaller pockets of land and association rather than to larger chunks that give you your name and identity. Shall we go to the next one? Okay, let's return to Roop Kaur. This is Pritchard's translation from Urdu. He writes that he had one daughter who, growing a finger width taller every month, in 15 years had become a young girl. Bishan Singh didn't even recognize her. When she was a child, she wept when she saw her father. When she had grown up, tears still flowed from her eyes. So this is Francis Pritchard's translation from Urdu. Let's move on to the next one. And he doesn't like the translation by Khalid Hassan. He really kind of criticizes the way Khalid does this part. He says that he includes a lot of padding. If you read that excerpt, Khalid Hassan, by comparison, takes away some information that the author wanted us to have and adds a fair amount of other information that he himself invents. So he doesn't like the way he describes that section on Roop Kaur. When he was first confined, he had left an infant daughter behind, now a pretty young girl of 15. She would come occasionally and sit in front of him with tears rolling down her cheeks. In the strange world that he inhabited, hers was just another pretty face. So this is Khalid Hassan's translation of Toba Tek Singh. So you can see that from that excerpt in itself can be a narrative. You know, the father leaves the child behind, the infant grows up, and she's a pretty girl, and perhaps that's the pretty face against a very turbulent world. So it's a very romantic, romanticized picture of the separation between the father and child. Look at the repetition of the word pretty, right? If you go back to the earlier one, look at the word, finger width taller every month. You know, she grows that much every month. It captures the minutiae in a very interesting way. In 15 years, had become a young girl. Question is, why was she crying even when she was a child? That question inevitably arises. And he was mad before he came here. He didn't turn mad in the lunatic asylum. So what brought his madness on is a question that's not answered. He is a prosperous farmer. He has a lot of lands. he has a lot of land, he is prosperous, and suddenly he seems to go mad. At what point does he go mad? At what age? So all these are, information that is not provided to us by Manto, right? So again, the child's reaction is also very interesting. Why has she been crying since she was born? So all that is not clearly explained. Next one. Now look at Khushwant Singh's translation. Bishan Singh had a daughter who had grown into a full-bosomed young woman of 15, but she showed no comprehension about his child. The girl wept bitterly when she met her father. So she's not crying all the time, she cries only when she meets the father, right? So you can see how meaning becomes, subtly changed when you look at all these translations, right? Full-bosomed young woman, there's a lot of emphasis on the physicality of the young girl in Khushwant Singh's man, and that's very interesting. So her sexuality is highlighted here, right, in Khushwant Singh's description, which tells us a lot more about the translator as well. Or perhaps he wanted to suggest that the sexuality becomes a problematic physical attribute during these turbulent times, right? So there are lots of things going on here. So can we go back once again to Francis Pritchard's translation? So the details of that young girl, the change in details of the young girl tells us a lot about the act of translation as well as the point of importance in the culture that they want to capture, right? So, so here fingerwidth is the word that captures my attention. Next one, pretty. The romantic notion of a pretty young girl lost in these turbulent worlds. And the next one is full bosom. These are the details that really attract my attention when I do a kind of a comparative study of all these translations. Next one. I think that's it. All right. So in this story, as I pointed out, identities become smaller. Identities become smaller, and that somehow gets lost or forgotten when we talk about large-scale events such as partition. So we need to realize that regional identities matter. Regional identities such as the identities of Toba Tek Singh to his own village, in Pakistan seems to be the foremost concern in his mind rather than anything else, right? Be it the daughter or be it any other familial concern. Right? So there is a kind of a marginalization of familial loyalties. Marginalization of familial loyalties. I gave you the example of the Hindu lawyer who seems to be obsessed with his lady love. Romance seems to be a foremost concern, but ultimately when he is told that he's going to go to India, he says that, oh no, I can't make a living there. So we can clearly see that the romantic fidelity takes a second seat, a back seat, and where he is more worried about the professions. Right? So familial concerns, and especially women, daughters, really are violently affected by this event, this unforgettable event in history. The imagery of trees, right? At one point we have one lunatic climbing up a tree and saying that I don't want to go to any country. I want to stay where I am on top of the tree, right? I want to stay where I am on top of the tree, page 57. And again, page 61, most of the lunatics resisted the exchange because they could not understand why they were being uprooted from one place and flung into another. Uprooted, right? Being plucked apart. So that imagery is used. Those of her gloomier dispositions by yelling slogans. And again, final sections of the story, again the tree imagery. They tried to use force. Bishan Singh planted himself. To plant oneself like a tree or a sapling would be planted, right? Bishan Singh planted himself on the dividing line and dug his swollen feet into the ground with such firmness that no one could move him. So he is like a big burly tree, which cannot be uprooted, and they just let him be, and the tree falls of its own, right? So it's a very interesting way to capture one's location. That's why the commentary of the critic is very interesting. The idea of dislocation of the self is captured through imagery in the story with that of the tree, right? So nice choice of figurative language utilized by Khushwant Singh. I would like to know how Manto used similar words to capture dislocation in Urdu. Right? Okay, if anybody knows Urdu, you can just go home and read that up. Any questions? We have read this story time and again, but I still love to come back to the story and compare them with other renderings of the partition. And every time we get to notice a different thing about the story. All right, thank you for your patience.